Welcome, people of planet Earth and all planets beyond. Thank you guys so much for watching. My name is Josh, and today we're going to talk about how you can use the zipper on your Levi's to help identify the age of those Levi's. So let's get into it. So I want to start out by letting you know that using the zippers is not like the most accurate method for most jeans, but it is a good tool, especially if some of the other elements that we would use to identify the jeans are not available. If you want to learn more about how to identify vintage Levi's, you can check the eye above for our vintage Levi's playlist with a bunch of videos covering a bunch of different topics on how to identify and date your vintage Levi's. As for the Levi's zippers, Levi's introduced zippers into their denim jeans around 1947 when women were not particularly interested in wearing the traditional button fly 501s, so Levi's instead replaced the button flies with a zipper, creating the 701, which was the sort of first zippered jean specifically, and it was for women. Later on in the 50s, Levi's would add the same feature for men in the 501Z, and we would later get other iterations of that sort of straight leg zippered jean in the 505, and then the zipper sort of became commonplace for most Levi's jeans. Now we're mostly just going to be talking about Levi's denim jeans or trousers or pants, but Levi's used zippers for other garments prior to 1947, but we're not going to talk much about those today. We'll mostly just focus on the jeans. So the way we're going to unpack this is we're going to look at sort of the decade by decade and talk about which of the zippers were most common in those eras. So we'll look all the way from the 40s, 50s, and 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, and even to present day, and show you which zippers are most commonly associated with those eras. Now, it's important to say that while we're going to focus on the most common zippers from each of these eras, there's certainly a possibility that you'll find other random brand of zipper on a Levi's garment here and there, sometimes because they were replaced. So they got a replacement instead of the original. Sometimes the factory just needed a zipper and they threw on whatever they had. Now first we're going to focus on the 40s and the 50s. This was the sort of inaugural era of Levi's zippers, and Levi's chose to use the brand Conmar. Here is a picture of a Conmar zipper. If your jean has this Conmar zipper, you can be pretty confident that this is pretty old. 40s, 50s, and potentially, bleeding somewhere into the early 60s on occasion, but the Conmar zipper is most closely associated with the 40s and the 50s. A couple uncommon examples of Levi's zippers from this time period are the original Talon zipper, which was used on Levi's jackets much earlier on in the 30s and in the early 40s, and then the lightning zipper that does seem to appear occasionally on Levi's jeans from this era. Now in the late 50s and into the 60s, Levi's would use another zipper called the Scoville gripper zipper, and it looks just like this right here. This gripper zipper was used quite often in the 50s and into the 60s as sort of one of the most standard of all of the zippers. And sometimes you'll find just a regular old Scoville branded zipper in its place. But typically, if you see the gripper zipper or the Scoville zipper that looks like this, they are going to be from the late 50s and into the 60s. Now again, remember that some of these zippers were used simultaneously, so you're only going to get a sort of general idea as to when these garments were from based on the zipper. Now in the late 60s and into the 70s, we started seeing another zipper take over from the Scoville gripper zipper, and that was the Talon 42 zipper. The Talon 42 zipper can be found in the late 60s, and it really dominated the 70s. In fact, there are probably most of the zippers used in the 70s were Talon 42. You can see some examples here. This Talon 42 zipper was pretty much synonymous with the 70s as Levi's used it, broadly speaking, all over the place. You will rarely find maybe a Scoville here and there, like one of the normal Scovilles, but generally speaking, and pretty much overwhelmingly so, the Talon 42 zipper is a great indication that your Levi's are from either at the earliest the late 60s and into the 70s. Now, as we hit 1980, Levi's does something rather novel with their zippers. They actually include the Levi's branding on the zipper. Gone are the generic names and the generic zipper brands on the zipper, and replaced with it is the Levi's branding. And this would continue until present day. These are how the Levi's zippers are even to this day. And this began in 1980. So if you have a pair of jeans with the Levi's branded zipper, you can be pretty confident that it's no older than 1980. Now, this doesn't mean generic zippers never were on a pair of Levi's after 1980. In fact, you can find some sort of stragglers from the early 80s with the Talon 42, and you can find some YKK zippers throughout the 80s and some of the 90s. And I think this is primarily because I believe YKK actually manufactured the zippers for Levi's. So if there was like a supply crunch on the Levi's branded stuff and they couldn't get a hold of it, they might have just replaced those zippers with YKK zippers in the meantime. So you'll see some YKK zippers here and there in the 80s and 90s. Generally, that's a pretty good indication that they are from the 80s and 90s, as you don't really see that happening much in present day, but those Levi's branded zippers pretty much dominate through the entire 80s, 90s, and up until today. So broadly speaking, those are the zipper brands that you will find throughout the zipper era of Levi's. There may be a few random ones here and there, but broadly speaking, if you see any of those zippers that we just mentioned, you can be pretty confident they are approximately from the eras that we associated them with. Hopefully this information will help you, especially if you come across some more difficult to identify Levi's jeans, and they can help you sort of sort some stuff out if you don't have all the other normal markers that we talk about in our other videos. So thank you guys so much for watching. Please remember to like, comment, subscribe. We'll see you guys on the next one. Peace.